Okay, so get this. Imagine like capturing the exact colors, those vibrant colors that you see with your own eyes.
Oh, wow.
No more of those, washed out skies or, landscapes that just look dull.
Yeah.
That's the promise of the Raynauld full color spectrum. And that's what we're going to dive into today.
Nice.
With excerpts from, well, their marketing materials.
Okay.
And product descriptions.
Interesting. Well, what I find really fascinating here is that Raynauld, seem to be addressing a very specific challenge in photography.
Yeah.
It's achieving, that perfect color accuracy.
Well,
it's something that, photographers have been grappling with for a long time.
You're right. It is. It's like the holy grail.
Yeah.
And you would think with all the advancements that we have in technology today that getting accurate color would be a given.
Yeah.
But it's not.
It's tricky.
Why is that?
Well, the tricky part is how our cameras actually interpret light. The color of ambient light, whether it's sunlight or shade or indoor lighting, it significantly impacts how those colors then appear in a photograph.
Yeah.
Our eyes naturally compensate for these variations, but cameras kind of need a helping hand.
Right.
And that's where white balance comes in.
Yeah, white balance, that setting, I always mean to adjust it. I often forget about it.
Sure.
So remind me, what is the big deal with white balance?
Okay.
And why is it so tricky to get right?
Well, white balance essentially tells your camera what true white looks like under certain specific lighting conditions.
Okay.
So it can then accurately render all the other colors.
Okay.
But finding a truly neutral white reference point, especially in complex scenes with a lot of different colors and light sources, it can be a real headache. Right,
and that's where these Raynauld Directivity white balance magic filters come in, right? The DCC 40 and the Tellus Pro.
Right.
They seem to be taking a very unique approach.
They are.
So tell me about that.
Yeah, so from the material that you've provided, it seems like they use a combination of what they call limited scene range and pointing light. So imagine you're pointing your camera at a scene. And the filter essentially acts like blinders on a horse, narrowing that field of view and isolating a specific area. That limited scene range helps eliminate color casts from extraneous light sources that could throw off the white balance.
So it's like using a spotlight to focus on the most important part of the scene.
Yes, exactly.
But even then, finding that perfectly neutral white object to use as a reference can still be tough, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about shooting, I don't know, like in a field of green grass. Or up in the mountains. There might not be a conveniently placed white wall or piece of paper.
Right.
And that's where this full color spectrum tool comes in. Raynauld claims it acts as the ideal white balance target.
Interesting.
Specifically designed to be used with their filters.
Hold on, the full color spectrum.
Yes.
It sounds like they're throwing the entire rainbow at the problem.
They are, kind of.
How does that help with finding neutral white?
That's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
The concept hinges on this idea that if you combine all the world's colors, theoretically, you end up with 18% gray.
Wow.
This 18% gray is a crucial reference point for achieving accurate white balance.
Wait, all the colors combined make gray?
Yes.
Now that's something I hadn't considered before.
It's true. It might seem counterintuitive, but it's based on how light and color interact.
Okay.
Now, traditional gray cards, they aim for that 18% gray.
Okay.
But the problem is they're susceptible to the surrounding ambient light, which can skew the results.
Oh, okay.
They don't reflect a truly pure gray.
So the Raynauld full color spectrum combined with their filters is trying to achieve this pure 18% gray.
Exactly.
For a more accurate reading.
That's the claim.
Okay.
The idea is that it mimics the full spectrum of colors found in the world.
Wow.
And when used with the Raynauld filters, eliminates unwanted light pollution, creating that pure, unpolluted 18% gray.
Okay, so I'm starting to get this. It's like using the entire spectrum of colors to create a super accurate gray point, which then leads to more accurate colors overall.
That's it.
But how does this pure gray actually translate into getting the right colors in my photos? Does it magically adjust things?
Well, it's not magic.
Okay.
But it does play a clever trick on the camera.
Okay.
When you manually set your white balance, using this pure gray as a reference, The camera gets a precise negative compensation value.
Okay.
That negative value essentially tells the camera how to adjust its color interpretation to neutralize any color casts caused by the ambient light.
Wow.
Theoretically zeroing out the white value and leading to more true-to-life color capture.
It's almost like giving the camera a color reset button.
That's a great way to put it.
So instead of searching for a random white object in the scene, I'd just point my camera at this full color spectrum tool while using the filter. That's the basic idea.
That's the basic idea.
And according to the material you shared, they claim it's incredibly easy to use.
They do?
Well, I'm always up for simple solutions.
Yeah.
Especially if they promise more accurate colors.
Sure.
But they do mention some specific tips for using it, right?
They do. They do.
Yeah.
For example, they recommend positioning the full color spectrum with the light source behind you.
Okay.
So you're shooting with the light, not against it.
Okay.
They also emphasize avoiding direct sunlight on the spectrum itself.
Okay.
And using your shadow to minimize reflections, which I found quite interesting.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Those little details can make a big difference.
They can.
What about the distance or focal length?
Right.
Any recommendations there?
Yes.
Okay.
They suggest adjusting your focal length accordingly to fill the frame with the full color spectrum for the most accurate reading.
Yeah.
Basically, you want to make sure the camera sees mostly the pure gray created by the tool.
Got it. So far, this full color spectrum seems like a pretty handy tool for all sorts of photography, from landscapes to portraits. It could be a game changer for anyone after true-to-life colors. But would it work in any situation? What about, like, night photography or astrophotography?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And actually, the material specifically mentions that it's not ideal for those situations. For night and astrophotography, they still recommend sticking with the standard methods for the Raynauld filters, which involves pointing at a distant light source, like city lights or a section of the sky.
That makes sense. Those shooting environments come with their own set of challenges when it comes to light and color. So it seems like this full color spectrum is aimed more at daytime shooting.
I think so.
In various settings where getting the colors right can be tricky.
Yeah.
And they have some pretty compelling results to back up their claims.
They do. They do.
Okay, like what?
They've tested this method with 11 different cameras, including some older models, with color-shifted screens, and even 3 iPhones.
Really?
And they claim to have achieved perfect, true-to-life color reproduction across the board.
That's a pretty bold statement.
It is.
Of course, anytime we hear something that sounds almost too good to be true, a little healthy skepticism is a good thing.
Of course.
What are your initial thoughts?
Whoa.
Could this full color spectrum be the real deal? Or is it just clever marketing?
I think it's important to remember that every photographer's workflow and needs are different. What works amazingly well for one person might not be the perfect solution for another.
Sure.
But based on what we've uncovered about the science behind it and the initial evidence that they've presented, it's certainly worth exploring further.
You're right. I'm definitely curious to learn more and see how this full color spectrum actually performs in real-world shooting scenarios.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe we're on the verge of a color revolution in photography.
It could be. It's interesting to consider what this focus on perfect color reproduction could mean for photography as an art form.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Does it change the way we perceive a photo?
Yeah.
Knowing that the colors are supposedly a perfect replication of reality.
Right. Does it make the photo more objective, less about the photographer's interpretation? Or does it give photographers another tool to play with, another way to express their vision?
It really makes you rethink your whole understanding of what a photograph even is. Is it a window to reality or a carefully constructed interpretation?
Yeah.
Where does color fit into all of this?
It raises a lot of interesting questions.
It does.
And speaking of color, I'm curious about the full color spectrum itself. Yeah. You've talked about, how it works, but what does it actually look like?
Yeah, I was wondering that too. Is it just a random jumble of colors or is there some kind of logic to it? How is it designed?
Well, unfortunately, the material we have doesn't go into a lot of detail about the design. It's described as a carefully arranged palette of colors that represent the full spectrum of hues found in nature.
So it's not just a simple rainbow gradient.
No.
It's more nuanced than that.
Exactly. And remember, it's not meant to be viewed directly, but rather as a white balance target through the lens of the Raynauld filter.
That makes sense. So the magic happens when the filter interacts with the full color spectrum, creating that pure 18% gray for the camera to use as its reference point.
It makes you wonder if the actual arrangement of colors on the spectrum matters.
Yeah, does it?
Is there a specific pattern or logic to it?
That's a great question. I'm picturing some kind of secret code embedded in the colors, but seriously, maybe the arrangement mimics how the colors are distributed in the natural world, or maybe it's based on some principle of color theory.
Those are all excellent possibilities.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the materials don't reveal the specifics of the design.
Got it.
It seems like it's a bit of a trade secret.
A little mystery keeps things interesting. But even without knowing all the details, I have to admit, this whole concept is pretty revolutionary.
I agree.
Who would have thought that the key to perfect color could lie in embracing the entire spectrum, not just focusing on gray?
It's a very clever approach.
Yeah.
And it really challenges the conventional wisdom of using a simple gray card for white balance.
Right.
This is something entirely different.
It's like they're saying, why settle for gray when you can have a whole world of color?
You got it. And I think that's what's so exciting about this. It's not just about improving, color accuracy.
Right.
It's about expanding our understanding of how color works and how we can utilize it in new ways.
Yeah.
It's almost philosophical.
It really is.
Yeah.
So let's say I'm totally sold on this idea and I want to try out this full color spectrum for myself. Are there any potential downsides?
Well, like
limitations that I should be aware of.
Like any new tool, there's going to be a learning curve.
Okay.
And while the marketing material emphasizes ease of use, I imagine it still takes practice to get consistent results.
Right. It's not a magic wand that instantly fixes all your color problems.
No.
It's a tool that requires some skill and knowledge to use properly.
Exactly. And it's worth noting that it's specifically designed to work with the Raynauld filters.
Okay.
You can't just use it with any camera or lens.
So there is a bit of an investment involved, both in terms of equipment and the time it takes to master the technique.
That's true.
For sure. And speaking of effort, I'm curious about that tip they mentioned about using your own shadow to minimize reflections.
Right.
It seems like such a simple yet clever technique.
I agree.
It highlights the importance of attention to detail.
Yeah.
And thinking creatively to get the most out of the tool.
Right.
It's a good reminder that photography is more than just equipment.
Yes.
It's about using your skills and knowledge to achieve your vision.
Absolutely. It's a blend of technical proficiency and artistic vision.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential benefits and some things to keep in mind when using the full color spectrum. But something I haven't heard mentioned is, are there any ethical considerations around striving for perfect color? Does it cross any lines in terms of photo manipulation?
That's an important question, and one that photographers are increasingly grappling with as technology advances, Where do we draw the line between, enhancing a photo and altering reality?
Right.
In the case of the full color spectrum, it's not about manipulating the colors themselves, but rather about correcting for the limitations of the camera sensor and the influence of ambient light.
So it's more about achieving a true representation of the scene. As opposed to creating something artificial.
Exactly. It's about getting the camera to see color the way our eyes do.
Right.
But of course, the ethical considerations around photo manipulation are complex and nuanced.
For sure. It's something that every photographer needs to think about carefully.
Absolutely.
But focusing back on the full color spectrum, I have to say, this whole conversation has really made me appreciate the complexity of color in photography.
It's easy to take color for granted.
It is.
But when you really dive into the science and the artistry of it, it's fascinating.
Absolutely. And the idea of using the full spectrum to achieve perfect white balance, it's almost like a metaphor for life. Sometimes you need to embrace the full spectrum of experiences, good and bad, to find true balance.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It speaks to the idea that everything is connected and that beauty can be found even in the midst of chaos.
Maybe that's the real lesson here.
Yeah.
The full color spectrum isn't just about achieving perfect color. It's about embracing the full spectrum of possibilities.
Beautifully said. It's a reminder that inspiration and wonder can be found in unexpected places, and that pushing boundaries can lead to amazing discoveries.
I couldn't agree more. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener, not just in terms of the technical aspects of color, but also the philosophical and artistic implications.
Well, our deep dive isn't over yet.
Oh, okay.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Okay.
But there's still more to explore, including what this technology could mean for the future of photography.
It makes you wonder, thinking about the future of photography, if this level of color accuracy, will it become like the new standard?
It's possible. It's certainly possible.
Yeah.
As technology advances and becomes more accessible.
Yeah.
It's not hard to imagine a future where perfect color reproduction is within reach for most photographers.
That raises some interesting questions.
Yeah.
What happens to like the artistic interpretation? When you take the guesswork out of color, does it become less about the photographer's vision and more about simply capturing reality?
Those are excellent questions, and there are no easy answers. Some might argue that perfect color makes photography more objective, more about documentation than artistic expression.
Yeah.
But I think it's more nuanced than that.
I agree. I mean, after all, even with perfect color, the photographer still makes choices about composition, lighting, framing, all those elements that contribute to the photo's impact.
Exactly. And think about, all those iconic photos throughout history. They weren't known for perfect color reproduction. Often it was the imperfections, the grain, the unique color palettes that made them so memorable.
That's a great point. It reminds me of the whole film photography revival.
Oh, yeah.
There's something about those slightly faded colors, the soft focus that people find like really appealing.
I know.
Even nostalgic.
Yeah, it's that human element, that touch of the unexpected that can give a photo soul. Yeah. And I think that's something that even the most advanced technology can't fully replicate.
So maybe this full color spectrum, while striving for technical perfection, could actually lead to a greater appreciation for the role of imperfection in photography.
I think you're right. It's a bit paradoxical.
Yeah.
But this pursuit of perfect color might make us realize that perfection isn't always what makes a photo great.
It's like that saying, perfection is boring.
Yeah.
Maybe a touch of imperfection is what makes a photo truly captivating.
I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
It's those imperfections that make us human. And those same imperfections can make our art more relatable, more engaging.
This has been a fascinating journey, hasn't it?
Yeah.
We started by exploring this quest for true-to-life color.
Yeah.
And ended up contemplating the beauty of imperfection.
It just shows that even something as seemingly technical as color can lead to deeper reflections on art and perception.
Well, we've certainly unpacked a lot today, but
we have.
This is just the beginning of the conversation.
It is.
The full color spectrum is just one example of how, technology is pushing the boundaries of photography.
Absolutely. It's an exciting time to be a photographer with all these new tools and possibilities emerging.
And as always, it's up to the photographer to decide how to use these tools to find their own balance between technical mastery and creative vision.
Exactly. The most important thing is to create images that speak to your heart and tell the stories you want to share with the world.
Well said to all our listeners out there.
Yep.
Keep exploring.
Yes.
Keep experimenting.
Keep pushing those.
And keep pushing those creative boundaries.
And remember, the most important camera is the one you have with you.
Right.
So get out there and capture the world in all its colorful glory.
That's a wrap on this deep dive.
It is.
Thanks for joining us as we explore this fascinating new frontier in photography.
Until next time, happy shooting.